412-626-6799. Webinar ID 946-3830-6878. Or they can join via Zoom by going to the Cumberland Schools website into the calendar for tonight and clicking on the link. So the first item on the agenda is approval of agenda, and in compliance with the Governor's Executive Order 20-34 dated May 15th, 2020, a discussion or a vote on whether there is public access to the meeting through adequate alternative means. And I need a motion to approve the agenda. And I actually
motion to approve.
I don't think we need to vote on the second part of that. Okay.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Ayes have it. 3-0. Second item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the May 5th, 2020 meeting. So I need a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Ayes have it. 3-0. And we have one major topic tonight on our agenda, which is the discussion of the fall teaching and learning plan preparation. And Mr. Demana will be leading this discussion in talking about some potential scenarios for the fall, considering COVID-19. So I will hand it over to Mr. Demana.
Good evening, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone in attendance. Thank you for coming to this virtual meeting. So I'm going to invite my colleagues to obviously join me throughout the presentation to add anything they'd like to interject. And I'll try to be as succinct and clear as I possibly can. And rather than just talking at the screen, I've chosen to put together a PowerPoint that will walk us through some scenarios. And as Mrs. Friedman alluded to, this is an attempt on the school department's part to be anticipatory as to what RIDE may be asking us to do in the fall. There are many, many unknowns. A few things that we want to note before we begin is it's still the end of May. You know, our school year hasn't ended, obviously, so this is extremely raw thinking. Our principals have not even seen this particular presentation yet. We haven't had the time to share some of this thinking with them. And just please try to look at this through the lens of the fact that it is preliminary thinking as we move through this, okay? So if Mike would cue it, I'll walk us through.
We'll just bring in some people into the meeting, but the screen share is up now, so.
Okay, can everybody hear me? If whoever I can see, everybody can hear me? Okay. So you can go to the next slide, Mike, when you can. Okay, so parameters. When a few weeks ago, the business manager was talking to me about the need to come up with a plan for sort of this tertiary budget that would be kind of floating out there in the event that we needed to respond or react in some way to additional costs that may be incurred by the district following the superintendent's budget that he submitted to the school committee and then that went on to the mayor in the town. So there are 3 parameters that kind of framed some of the thinking that we've been doing, and nothing has been decided. There's none of this that is concrete. This is just merely some common sense things that I wanted to look at, we wanted to look at when we were framing our thinking. And the first was looking at the CDC guidelines. In the absence of the guidance from RIDE at this point, and we're supposed to be receiving some information this week, hopefully. But in the absence of that, we thought that a good starting point was going to be the CDC guidelines to interpret those guidelines. And what we've done is we've created an organizer that sort of provides roles to different people in the district to help support the superintendent's task force. So we started that work, and we've started to outline and designate people's roles. Okay. The second thing we wanted to do is we wanted to create a parent survey and access data and make database decisions as we progress through the summer around this. And we understand that at any point, the survey only serves as one moment in time, in that as parents, our opinions change. My opinion about what I feel about sending my daughters to school under these conditions today may very well shift a few months from now, greatly depending on the situation that we're faced with. And then the third parameter that we were looking at is potential resource limitations. So we can't create space, right? We have limited classrooms, staffing, busing schedules. The busing budget was framed for our current traditional conditions, not in an event where we needed to add additional circumstances to our busing situation. Added budgetary supplies, medical supplies. Byboard is a consortium, a company that we are working with other districts with, and the superintendent can get into that a little bit later. They're just a consortium that we are looking to get medical supplies quotes from in the event that we have to mass purchase those things for our students and our staff. And then there are further state aid reductions that have been rumored that are, again, not concrete, but something that we're fiscally, I think, responsible to pay attention to. And there's one other thing to note here, that there are some other healthcare conditions that may be contributing to additional resource limitations. And I'm not going to speak about it because this meeting is not about the resources more than it is what the raw thinking is. And if anyone has any questions for the business manager on those things, or the superintendent, I would imagine you can, obviously direct those things to them. Okay. So those are the parameters that we used in framing our thinking. All right. And the way we see it is,
Tony?
again, in the absence of any information, there are potentially, I think, three major scenarios that we may be faced with moving into the fall, and we need to be prepared to enact one or a multiple of these at any given moment in time. So the first would be, it's been rumored that, and again, it's a rumor, that RIDE was going to be releasing some parameters and conditions around districts needing to have elementary students, K-5, in schools, and potentially all secondary students in a distance learning scenario. Okay. I will get into each of these scenarios in depth, so I just want to frame and describe what you're looking at. The second one is what I would describe as a hybrid model. It's 50% of the time for students in school, 50% distance learning, and basically almost running a parallel school system to our traditional model, which again, I will define in more detail. And then lastly, the 100% distance learning model that we've enacted, and I think rather well and rather efficiently. We turned it over rather quickly, and I think our district is doing an amazing job at our distance learning execution. Okay, so scenario one.
Mr. Devana.
Yes.
So when you talk about the CDC guidelines, just to make sure we're all on the same page here as you're about to go into this, especially this scenario, what are the, the 3 or 4 main components of those CDC guidelines that are, driving your thinking around this?
Sure, that's a fair question. It's really centered around what are the classroom conditions that we need to create around social distancing. How are we going to execute a schedule where we can keep students safe? And B, how can we create equitable conditions for all students in the district so that they're all sort of getting the same experience, so that we don't have one group of students receiving one form of an academic program and the others getting another, while we look at the social distancing, the spacing in the classrooms. How can we execute this within the parameters of our current collective bargaining agreement? What can we execute with the teachers? What can they do? What can they do under those conditions? All right. And there are some detailed things that we have in that document that I referenced that we can swing back to and sort of show everyone, okay?
Okay.
So for this particular scenario, this is only my opinion. This is the rumored one where our elementary students would be in school completely and our secondary students would be at home. This one, in my opinion, would pose an extremely difficult challenge for our district for us to execute. Not enough staff, even if we have additional classrooms, because if our entire secondary level is at home, and that has its own negative things about it. Technically, you have empty middle schools and an empty high school, right? In theory. Well, we cannot run our elementary schools at capacity the way they are to safely meet those physical conditional guidelines within the buildings. So we would have to spread kids out. So automatically there would be a disruption with students not being in their home schools, spread out amongst several schools. We'd have to look at the aesthetics to accommodate elementary students, perhaps in a middle school building. So there would be a lot of different things that we would have to take a look at. Not ideal. In addition to that, if you take a scenario where you have, let's say 25 students in your typical, I'll use BF Norton as an example, a typical BF Norton third grade classroom, right? The second you split that class in half, because 20, 22, 24 kids, too many kids to have to safely social distance, we wouldn't be able to do that in our buildings. The second you split that class in half, okay, so teacher A has 12, where do the other 12 go in a full day model, right? Among other challenges, I'm just giving you some brief problems that I would see. I think it poses the biggest challenge for us in terms of planning, busing, and a big time problem fiscally, because we would need additional core instructional teachers at first sight without digging into it a little bit more deeply. I added the 6 to 12 all virtual equity issues, not ideal academically. Dr. Santa and I have spent some brief time. We haven't been able to get into too much detail, and certainly she can interject at any time, but we feel as though we are intent on whatever model we go with, we should be providing the same or as close to the same model instructionally in terms of exposure to academics as equally as possible across the district for all students. We don't want it to be heavy on one end and not heavy on virtual on one end for students and create that inequity. That makes sense? Yes, okay. So that's scenario number one that's been rumored that I think would pose a great challenge for us.
Hey, Mr. Devani, you said you're expecting some kind of guidelines or something from RIDE this week?
Yeah, the superintendent talked to us today about that. He mentioned that I think Wednesday, a statewide calendar has been rumored to come out, and then by Friday, some guidelines. A lot of the things that are coming out of Providence, I actually spoke to a friend of mine who's a teacher in Providence earlier today, and I asked him if he had heard anything, because there's been a lot of rumors that the state will have to follow suit on as to how Providence sort of does things. But he said that they've only received very loose guidelines around the classroom parameters that I talked about, classroom conditions. Nothing monumental. So scenario two, this is the one that I believe, and I have spent the most time with my team thinking about, and the most time talking with Dr. Santa about, which is what I would call the hybrid model or the parallel school system. And oh, by the way, in the scenario one, that would constitute retaining all of our current personnel. You need all your personnel to run that model, okay? In scenario two, this hybrid model where we call it a parallel school system, I'm gonna walk you through the intricacies of this in rather detail, starting with the high school, then middle school, then elementary, okay? But this is the 50% virtual, 50% in class. And I feel it's the most likely scenario and one that we feel the most viable given the circumstances we may be up against. So about a week ago, I issued an email to the high school administration just providing them with some loose parameters that we felt they needed to help us execute in the spirit of that equity that I'm discussing, okay? So within that schedule, or parameters, I should say, there's a lot of latitude for the high school, but basically what we would be asking them to do is to run an A and B week schedule, where over the span of those quote unquote 10 instructional days, students would be in school for 5 days and virtual for 5 days. It would constitute them splitting somehow their freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior classes in half, so that half of each of the classes in the building at a time, and the other half is operating virtually. So my daughter Maya will be in high school. She'll be a freshman next year. She would be, say, in school Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then she would be virtual on Tuesday, Thursday. Then the following week it would inverse. Okay. Now within that loose structure, the high school has a great deal of work to do because there's lots of different ways they can approach their schedule. They could choose to run a shortened period, 40-minute period, and run all through their periods on a Monday. So Maya would have all of her periods on Monday. And then on Tuesday, she would be virtual. The next group that would come in would have all of their entire schedule run on Tuesday. And then she'd have her classes repeat on Wednesday, and so on and so forth. Another model is they could split the schedule in half, where they have longer blocks for those classes, so extended blocks, but only half of their schedule on Monday. And then when she goes in on and do the assignments that she's, virtual assignments on Tuesday that supports her Monday instruction. And then on Wednesday, she would have the second half of her schedule. And there are pros and cons to all of those things that I don't want to speak to this evening because there's so many things that go into that. But I'm just trying to provide you with some semblance of there's lots of options. They can even run semesters if they wanted to, semester courses if they had the capacity to do so. So Adolfo and his team, as long as they can work within a 50-50 model, and he has some scheduling issues, right? Because they're a school of choice in terms of classes. Kids pick their classes. There's going to be some work that has to be done there. But essentially, that's the framework. And in this particular model, you have to remember that at the high school level, it is credit bearing. So students have to assume and earn credits. So all of our personnel would be needed, right? In this particular model too. So in my opinion, again, I believe that this one is the most viable, and this just encompasses the high school. So then, all right, so what will we do at the middle school level? If the high school, let's say in theory, can pull this off, what are we going to do at the middle school level? Potentially. So at the middle school level, things would look a little bit different. And the reason why this model would look a little bit different is because the students at the middle school level may not necessarily, especially sixth graders, be capable of staying at home for a full day virtually. I'm not sure as a parent, I try and look at this through a parent lens. I'm not sure I would be comfortable with my youngest being in sixth grade, which she's not, she's in fourth, but if she were in sixth grade, being at home all day virtually while I'm at work. So what we did was we said, okay, maybe we would run the middle schools in an AM, PM session where we would again divide each grade level into halves so that half of the school is in school at once, half of the sixth, half of the seventh, half of the eighth is in school in the AM, and the other half is in the PM. And remember that this would allow us to better meet those guidelines for social distancing and having fewer kids in the hallways, fewer kids interacting with one another and creating pods. They want us to create, you reference those conditions as we're going through this. More of them are sort of ringing a bell. I've been looking at documents for 3 straight days. So, but they want kids to be in pods where they're not changing groups all the time, where teachers are actually coming in a limited, their exposure has to be limited. So if you're running a half-day session, right off the bat, we start to think about, okay, so then what does the academics look like in a half-day schedule for a student? Well, you would probably be looking at the 4 major content areas. You only have about 90-minute blocks for each schedule. That would take you for the half day. So if you had 90 minutes for ELA and 90 minutes for social studies, say on day 1, on day 2, you would have 90 minutes for math and 90 minutes for science. So what happens to the students the other half of the day? Well, the other half of the day would be virtual. However, that's easier said than done, because the final bullet there says, what do you do for students whose parents work? No one's home for them. Well, we need personnel to provide enrichment for those families somehow. So if the students can't go home in AM session, they have to be in school somehow, or we need to retain students in the PM, should the district choose to go with this model. We would need our PE, our music, our art teachers, our STEM teachers to provide enrichment to those students in the PM or AM sessions, depending on when those students are in school. And I'm going to get into data in a second and how data will impact this. But again, this is theoretical, and I'll get into busing and why this is only theory. But generally speaking, that's what the model would look like at the middle school. And now elementary. So similar to the middle school in that we would have to run AM and PM sessions. Elementary teachers would need to teach ELA and math every single day, AM and PM, and repeat that session in the PM for the other half of their class. Somehow science has to be built in. During our virtual learning session, our distance learning session, science was not covered in our K-2 curriculum. We just couldn't get it in given the hands-on nature of it and the time frame that we had to turn it over. So we haven't figured out science into this mix. So right now science is kind of floating on the outside because we have math and ELA. And remember, we have to get in intervention and support for those kids who are struggling in the tier 2 and all of that. We need kids to be able to read and do math. And again, we would be faced with the district needing to account for families who work in the AM, PM. Where are these kids going to go? We need to be able to provide support, enrichment, some sort of blocks, and itinerants would need to provide that enrichment. We would need the PE, the health teachers, the art, music, STEM, all of that to provide that, provided that we have space in the buildings to do it safely. And those are conditions that I'm going to talk about that principals face in a little bit. So the challenges, I wanted to kind of talk about and be preemptive with the challenges and sort of put the things out there that we've thought through, that we say, hey, this model they presented has a lot of holes in it. This looks like Swiss cheese to me. Well, we know it looks like Swiss cheese because here are some of the challenges that we would still need to face. First and foremost, I need to minimize my screen because it's blocking everything. One, busing schedules. We are working with the bus company, and they have sent me a preliminary schedule that is very rare at this point. And I'm just going to merely share an example of what we talked about and why, and the challenges that how the busing schedule has to coincide with our school day and how it may impact the CBA and potential amendments to the collective bargaining agreement and so on. It's a domino effect. Number two, where do itinerants provide enrichment? And what if the number of students exceeds the capacity to safely meet the guidelines? So what if our families' need for having sort of AM and PM enrichment in a 50-50 model, our students exceed the capacity in the buildings? What are we going to do? Principals are going to have to be a part of that conversation, and they face a major overhaul and challenge in managing building procedures. So their summer, I'm concerned for the principals because their summer is going to be quite difficult. And we need teachers designated at each grade level in each school, pending the data that we receive, to provide virtual instruction to those families who may choose to not send their students to school in the fall. So what I mean by that is I referenced a parallel school system. And what I mean by that is there may be a subset of the population of parents who choose not to send their kids to school, but expect us to provide virtual instruction. So what are we going to do? Well, one example of that is, and why our data is so important, is let's say, for example, in a third grade classroom, we have 100 students in a said building. And let's say we have 4 teachers in that particular track, 25 per, just to use round numbers. If 25 of those students, if 25 of those families choose in that particular grade level to be virtual, then 1 teacher would have to be designated to provide virtual instruction to those 25 kids in an AM and PM session, just as their colleagues would be in school splitting those 25 kids up into an AM PM session. So you'd have 12 kids in the AM, 13 kids in the PM, say, across that grade level. And then you'd have a segment out virtually that we would be accommodating virtually in this parallel school system, trying to, now pacing would be impacted, and that comes with its own challenges, albeit imperfect. But I'll pose the question, does the school department have a responsibility to accommodate those families that don't feel comfortable sending their kids to school? In my opinion, the answer to that is yes. So those are some of the challenges there. We have a few more. Will some families choose to homeschool? If we see an uptick in this data, you're going to see a decline in funding. So if families choose to homeschool, depending on how bad the conditions evolve, you know, we may see an uptick in this data, and we need to be prepared for that. To what extent will we be provided will we be required to provide virtual education to families who don't homeschool and want to remain connected to our curriculum? So that's the parallel system I talked about. And remember, no classroom teacher can manage both. Teachers will need to be designated to do so. It is impossible and ridiculous to ask a classroom teacher to be able to handle a load of students or a subset of their class in front of them and then manage a virtual situation. You need designated teachers to do that. And by the way, none of these scenarios are recommendations. This is just raw thinking. These aren't recommendations. This is just, okay, so if the state says this, this is maybe what it'll look like in its rawest form. 100% distance learning for all. In my opinion, this is the least likely scenario. Based on the governor's push for the economy and families needing to go to work, I do not see this becoming an option, with one asterisk. I do see a scenario potentially where we are in a hybrid situation where we may have to, we may have an outbreak, where we may have to transition quickly to a distance learning model, all distance learning model. We need to be able to have the staffing and the things in place in order to make that transition and do so. From a preparation standpoint, we're prepared to do distance learning 100%. Maintaining the current distance learning plan roles for staff as it's written and designated by my office and the Office of Special Services for all personnel in the district has already been done. You know, not to say that it's perfect, it's not. It can evolve, it can be tweaked, there's a lot of things that can happen to it, but for all intents and purposes, the state of our curriculum and how we're implementing it across the district, you know, K-12, pre-K-12, I would say we're in really good shape should we go that way, but I don't believe that this is the most likely option. Second option would be, you know, would the district focus only on content areas such as math, science, ELA, and social studies? Very unpopular option. And then the thirdly, the district has to weigh the risk of the added financial costs through the busing, medical equipment, IT staffing needs, and potential loss in state aid, among other things. So those aren't variables that I can speak to because they don't fall under my jurisdiction. My job, the job of my office is to sort of say, okay, we have 4,700 kids. What are we going to do, and are we prepared to fill those gaps and fill those holes if we have to? So that is scenario 3. Data and busing. This is where I think a lot of our information is going to help drive some of the decision making. So my office has been working with the ID department to gather data. It's vital to launching any type of plan successfully in the fall. We need to know what families will not be choosing busing. We need to know that. We need to know what families will not be sending their children to school in the fall. We need to know what families will send their children, will be sending their children to school, no matter what the COVID circumstances are in the fall, because they have, their own economic conditions that they need to react to and abide by. So why? Why do we need to know this? We need to know with as close to accuracy as possible how many virtual families there will be utilizing busing, how many students we will need to plan for in the buildings, and I'll get to that more in depth in a second, and how we can make the most efficient busing plan that doesn't cripple us in rising costs. And all of this is going to take a great deal of time. So I'm going to provide a sample busing schedule and a sample data set right now. So I communicated with the bus department because I wanted to gauge what was possible. So what you're looking at is not etched in stone. It is in by no way, shape, or form a final copy of anything. But what I wanted to know from the bus company was, are we going to have to stagger our times like we do now? What is the interval of time you need to flip over in an AM, PM session to clean your buses, turn over, pick up the kids, drop them off? And what are the conditions that we can contribute as a district to make sure that your process can be efficient as a bus company? Including making sure that we stay within parameters of the CBA, meaning we don't have 8-hour school days, right? So I submitted a schedule that looked like, not like this. It looked like something like 8 a.m. to 11 for the first session in the elementary school only. And then from 11 to 12, there would have been a 40-minute planning block and a 20-minute lunch. And then instruction would resume for the second session, PM session, from whatever it was, 12 to, what I say, 8 to 11, 11 to 1, 12, 12 to 3, right? So they countered with this and said we would need till at least 8:30 to pick up students and get them to the schools. And I said, okay, so in that scenario, what does the district have to do? And they said, well, this would assume a couple things. One is potential depot stops. And the second thing they mentioned is that the district would have to do some work, and Mike would have to certainly be involved, I would imagine, in communicating with the bus companies, sort of demographic, whatever ways, Google Maps sites, on figuring out clusters of students who live in like areas and having those kids be the AM, and then clustering students in the PM and having like students in clustered areas be the PM, which would provide efficiency for pickup, drop off, pickup, drop off. That would make the process more efficient. It seemingly, in theory, sounds great. Whether it's executable, I don't know. So then the proposed middle school times, in theory, would have looked like what you see there, 7:45 to 10:45, and then the PM session would run an hour later from 11:45 to 2:45, and the Cumberland High School schedule would be 7:05 a.m. to an end time of 1:55. Now, this conversation did not go any further with the bus company. I received it. I believe there was one more email that Mr. Prignano sent to Armando after he saw this schedule, and that was in the spirit of, we've only bused for X amount of buses. We only budgeted 27 buses. So can this be done with 27 buses? We haven't received a response yet, but as you can see, this schedule will impact how we go back and frame the actual schedule of the school day. So if they come back and say, this can't be done, or the depot stops won't work, or one of those things creates a domino effect, and the time shift, the school day shifts, and we're gonna have issues. So we've got to monitor this closely, but we've started to have the conversations and we've started to get the data, and I think we know where we have to go from there. Mike, can you cue a sample of the data, please? Okay, so we know that we need information, and we're going to need it multiple times. This data only represents a moment in time. Mike and I talked about, what should we share, what shouldn't we share, and we don't want to overwhelm with numbers. We don't want to inundate you all with information that is going to change, but we wanted to get a scope, a general scope of where people are right now. So if you hone in on any one particular school, I'm not going to orient you to any particular school, but if you look at it, me personally, I'm looking at Ashton, and I see that nearly 63% of the population needs busing, and you see 60% at BF Norton. Then I drop down to Cumberland, it's around that 60, community at 77.5, Garvin at 66 or so. So we see some consistencies in the percentage of students needing busing. By the way, I want to note, and Mike can add details to this if he'd like, but the survey is tied to a student's LACID number. In other words, we need to know the number of third grade students that are going to be in seats at community versus the number of students that won't. So when parents respond for their respective children and it's tied to a LACID number, we're going to have very specific data tied to the actual grade levels, which will give us the data to know what we're to prepare for so that we can appropriately set up the conditions for social distancing. And that is the procedural process that we are thinking about. The other few things that one more thing. I mean, obviously, other than the busing, there is other information. We'll be sending kids to school. Obviously, there's always going to be a high population of undecided. What we plan on doing there, rough thinking again, is eventually funneling those undecided surveys into choosing one of two options. Are they coming, or are you keeping them home? Next slide. Okay, lastly, we know that there were glitches in the survey. I was talking to Mike this weekend. IT fixed them, and if you have any questions regarding that, you can direct them directly at Mike. I'm not trying to put him on the spot, but I cannot answer an IT question to save my life. We need to send out the survey multiple times to see if the data trends and shifts in a different direction, or if it's going to stay pretty indicative of where it is now. We understand that the data only represents one point in time. We get that, but we have to root our decisions in this data and adapt as the data shifts. We needed a starting point. It can't be, we're essentially planning in the dark without, guidance from RIDE. So the data at least gives us some semblance of light in the tunnel. So stay tuned for more surveys. The authenticity of parent responses are critical in selecting the model that we're going to adopt. And once we've had an opportunity to analyze the data, then we can report out, the initial findings of where families stand. And we haven't been able to analyze the entire subset of the data to tell us really what that means, respective to the grade level seats in each of the buildings. So that concludes what I have at this point, or we have at this point. I'm not sure if this meets your expectations as a committee, but I've certainly given you a lot to chew on.
Yeah. So, so then we can, amongst the committee, we can open it up to questions. And I have one clarifying, well, at least one clarifying question, Tony. The survey, the parent survey, had two questions on it, right? One related to, do you need busing? And one related to whether you will send your student to school in the fall, kind of regardless of what the situation is. Are those the same two questions that you will continue to ask? Are those the two most important data points for you to have?
So,
or will there be other questions?
This survey created more headaches for us and wording the head, and Mike is smiling. I mean, we talked more about this survey on how to ask the questions in a non-objective way. I think we could teach a course on this at this point. The questions that I heard that we submitted, I don't know if there was, Mike, was there a discrepancy between the message that Marguerite did via voice versus the email questions that went out, or were they completely aligned? Because when I heard the questions from Marguerite's and answered for my children, it appeared as though there was the busing question, there was I'm sending them, I'm not sending them, and then undecided.
They were aligned based on when we went through the script itself. I think it may just be the way some people may have interpreted the message.
Okay, so we can go back and take a look at it. What we wanted to do is get something out. We spent a lot of time on it, but we wanted to get something out, and albeit imperfect. So we'll try and refine it and make it better the second go around. But generally speaking, we want to collect the same type data.
Okay. And so it's important, it's critical for parents to understand the importance and criticality of this survey. And like this busing question, if there are parents who are able to drive their kids to school and pick them up, we actually probably want to encourage that. Is that what I'm hearing? Because then that will allow us some more flexibility on the busing side.
I'd say so. I mean, again, I don't want to speak for the superintendent, but I mean, in theory, yes, the fewer kids that take the bus, the better.
Okay. Mr. Collins, you're muted. Okay, good.
I am, thank you. This may be a foregone conclusion, but I noticed none of the scenarios included us going back to school in the fall, normal. So is that what you're hearing? I think we all kind of assume that, but that's not one of the scenarios.
Yeah, that's a good question, Mr. Collins. The reason why I didn't put it down as a scenario is I don't see how we can meet the guideline. The guidelines would be virtually meaningless, in my opinion. We would not be able to execute what they're asking us, at least how we've interpreted them or how my office has interpreted them, and keep the kids and the staff safe. You've got to keep our teachers, our custodian, everybody has to be safe, students included. So I don't see a scenario where we're all in school. Think about community school. I'm not sure how we socially distance in that environment. So it's not a scenario that I spent not even a second thinking about.
Now, how soon will you need to, realistically, how soon would you need to have a decision on the scenario? Because it sounds like regardless of whatever's decided, there's going to be a tremendous amount of behind the scenes work over the summer to pull whatever scenario off.
I've spent the most amount of time, like I said, on the hybrid model, because I believe that's the one we believe that's what's most likely. But my fear in preparation is for the principals, because once we go with a model, and we may meet and they may have ideas and bring things to the table, and we may be at another achievement meeting 2 weeks from now after school has ended, and we may be talking about something completely different that we haven't thought about, right? Things evolve. My worry for them is, how are they going to create a new procedure? I mean, everything is going to look different. Student pickup is going to look different. Arrival is going to look different. When kids arrive with no masks, what are we going to do? Are we going to have them? What are we going to do when we have someone who comes in, who's going to be, if we have to take temperatures when kids come in, who's doing that? And how are they being exposed? So there's a myriad of things that principals, along with central office and in collaboration with everyone here and the superintendent's task force, are going to have to think about. And, timing wise, I think once we get the guidelines from RIDE, let's say the guidelines come from RIDE, right, immediately, we'll be on that like white on rice. I mean, the second they come out, we'll be looking at that, and we're going to be cross-referencing that with what we have. And then we'll be, obviously Dr. Santa's going to have to be involved right away, along with my team and everyone in the central office and the principals.
Okay. Mrs. Waters.
Hi, Tony. Just a question around the third scenario where it said focus on the math, ELA, science, and social studies. In the event that, say we go with the first or second scenario, the kids are in school and then we have to pivot and go back to 100% district learning. What was the decision of why we wouldn't do it like we do today? Like, so I've got a middle schooler and a high schooler where they have all 7 of their areas, you know, between the 2 days, between the blue day and a white day, or the A day and a B day. Why wouldn't we do that model? Because it seems to be working.
An A week, B week for elementary and middle school kids?
No. I'm saying, so in scenario 3,
Yep.
you said focus on math, ELA, social studies, and science.
Mhm.
But the way that we're doing the distance learning today,
Yep.
they have each of their, 7, 6 classes between the 2 days.
Yeah.
Why
So-
wouldn't we just do that?
You can, and I'm not recommending, those aren't choices. Those are merely the panoramic view of what we're up against, weighed against what the superintendent and what you as school committee members are faced with as it pertains to the risk in financial costs and potentially operating a budget that is not balanced. That is not really for me to speak to. You know, our job in my office is to look at this and say what options are out there, what's going to be the, what's the direction we're going to go with. And I stated the first option was we can do distance learning exactly the way it is right now. That's the least amount of work for us. We're ready to go. I mean, let's hit autopilot, let's improve it a little bit, and let's go. That's fine with me. It's really up to ultimately what the budget picture looks like and what the school committee chooses as it weighs its options fiscally. Yes.
I can add just a piece to that, and I think that what is being put in front of you tonight to look at is just truly scenarios, hypothetical and scenarios for the fall. And that the truth is that we have no idea what September is going to look like. The only thing we know with any bit of certainty is that it won't look like September of 2019. And that for the district to be able to react and provide education to students, we need to have a little bit of flexibility to make sure that the budget is responsive and balanced in that. And so we have a June 1 deadline for that piece, and that's not on the agenda tonight, but that's, I think, the reason why this was placed on the agenda tonight was to respond to the issue as to whether as to what the potential models are. The honest answer to that is we don't know what the potential models are, and RIDE could tell us next week that all of what we talked about tonight is not acceptable to them. Yeah.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Mitchell, sorry.
Okay, that's okay. Just to build on what Tony and Katie have said, as I've said many times, superintendents meet twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. And as you can imagine, one of our more important topics of discussion every meeting is what's going to happen for the start of the 2020-2021 school year. So we are hungry to get some direction from the Department of Ed. And supposedly, as Tony mentioned, in the meeting today, we heard that there is going to be a statewide calendar that has been developed that will be shared with all districts. And it's my understanding that it is a calendar that the Department of Education is hoping that all districts will follow. I don't know if it will be mandated. And the other thing is, there is so much detail and direction that's needed. So for example, like one of the things that came up today was how many students are going to be allowed on the bus. and there needs to be some consistency there. So, you know, Cumberland can't have more students on a bus than North Kingstown or Lincoln. So there needs to be some direction on that. We need some consistency on the number of students that will be allowed in a classroom to appropriately socially distance. So we need some direction on that. One of the things that came up today is, what if there are adults and or students for that matter, but adults whose health is compromised in some way and who may be more at risk of exposure or more at risk of, you know, getting the virus? You know, what are we going to do about those kinds of things? So there really are, I mean, we tonight, we're just sharing with you some options that we have discussed and some options that, you know, we have read about and done research on, but nothing is cut in stone. And you know, as the superintendent, I mean, one of the things that, most important things that I have to do is make sure that we are spending within our means. And we're also hearing that there's going to be potentially an additional cut in state aid. And as you all know, we already are being cut. That's why we're in the position that we're in. One of the reasons why we're in the position that we're in. So the state aid has not been determined yet. And if anyone heard the governor, I think she's talked today about, you know, she's expecting a $900 million budget shortfall that's going to have to be resolved in some way. And I think all branches of government are going to be impacted in some way. So what we thought we were getting, even with us, a cut, it may be even less. So we have some really difficult decisions to make. And our goal is to keep everyone. I need to state that publicly. Our goal is to keep everything intact. But once we get some guidance, what is the educationally sound thing for us to do? So those are the kinds of things that we're talking about, and we definitely need some direction. And I'm hoping that we get it by the end of this week, which is what's been discussed. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Fiorello.
I just have a question for Dr. Santo regarding special education. I'm sure we've learned a lot of what is working and what isn't working. I have a lot of questions and concerns about what the fall might hold, from everything from occupational therapy, APE, speech therapy, pretty much the whole gamut of it.
Yeah, me too. So I mean, I think the big job in special ed is that first of all, it's going to be predicated on whatever is happening in regular ed first. So I need to know what is going on, what is that plan going to be? And then we start looking at individualized students as well as individualized in their individual programs. So how I'm framing it in my mind right now is if the students that are receiving a lot of services and are needing a lot of direct instruction in a specialized program are in a smaller group to begin with, they're already a pod upon themselves, and they may end up being in school and doing significantly less virtual. They also happen to be the population that doesn't do very well virtually because of all the services they receive or their method of communication. So there is that potential. I'm not saying, again, nothing's written in stone. That's the potential. It's also, unfortunately, the population of students that's more at risk and more vulnerable. So it's like a double-edged sword. As far as specific services, they're doing some of that. We're doing virtual meets and things on those lines, but you really can't do physical therapy, adaptive PE, you can do somewhat. You really can't do PT virtually. It's much more physical. And the problem with is that, how do you social distance? The issues are innumerable. So for instance, we have students that they're not going to be capable of wearing masks. They're either not capable, either physically, emotionally, or developmentally. They're not going to be wearing a mask. Picture sticking a mask on, a 2-year-old and expecting them to wear it the entire day. It's not going to happen for some of our population. So what is the guidance for that particular population? Right now, they're not required to wear a mask, but if they're in a school environment, are they going to be required? And if they're required to wear that, are they now allowed to come into school? So that's just one of multiple issues. I'm really going to have to approach this. We have just about 700 students with special needs. The majority of those kids are educated like the regular kids in the regular environment with intervention and special education supports and things like that. And then there's this whole nother population of students where there's going to be much more planning that will have to take place. So I don't have any specific answers for you. I do think we're going to need to have that virtual option. Our number of special educators is very limited, so I'll also have to be very mindful of how do we do that with what we got, which is my question every single year. How do I get more of what we need with what I got? So Mark, I don't really have any specific answers because it really kind of depends on what the model for regular ed is.
Oh, of course.
So, yeah. So if you take sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. It's, the nature
Jump
of the
rope.
I also received a letter from a parent concerned about 504 concern, just the normal concerns about that, and not sure what, if anything, will be involved in the spring for that.
Well, I think 504 is about accommodations, and most of the time it's accommodations to the academics that should be able to be done virtually. And if there are accommodations to the physical environment, that wouldn't be an issue for virtual. And if we're in school, it'd be the same as if we're in school full time. So am I concerned about students on 504 plan? Sure, I think about them, but it's not the same level of concern of the kids that need significant direct instruction modifications and have significant numbers of services that are very hard to be done virtually. But the picture isn't all grim. A lot of our students are doing much better virtually than they did in the real life because of the social aspect being out. But just to give you one of my thinking regarding if we are in school for a good bit of the time, now think about my significant behavioral students. I'm talking about my developmentally delayed behavioral students, the students that don't have significant cognitive deficits on top of behavior. Then when they're in someone's proximity, it's not malicious, but it's not like we can say, stay away, 6 feet away. It's not going to happen. And then I have a population of kids that do have pretty significant behaviors where they are in, purposefully in other people's spaces or are dysregulated to the point of needing some form of intervention, either an escort or unfortunately, if they're significantly unsafe to themselves and others and at imminent risk, we will put our hands on. Well, how are we going to do that in this environment? So I can give you many more scenarios of how this is a huge issue, and I'm not quite sure what we're going to do. The first piece is, and the planning over the summer is going to be intense, and we're running ESY. So ESY, for those who don't know, is extended school year. Right now, I have just about 140 or 150 students who will be receiving some form of service over the summer. That could be just speech, just could be reading, or it could be full day service. Well, not full day. I don't run a full day, but they could be receiving a couple days a week, 4 or 5 hours worth of service. I'm still having to run that in a virtual world on top of planning for the fall. So it's going to be, as always, a busy summer, but specifically extra busy this summer.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Sorry, it wasn't really an answer. It's just there's a lot of issues.
The question needed to be asked. I wasn't really expecting a real.
Yeah, I don't know yet.
So,
but believe me, we'll have a plan. I'll have a plan for all the kids. I'm confident of that.
So it's clear that nobody has all the answers right now, and we're trying to collect data, and we're waiting for RIDE, and we have the CDC guidelines, and we have all these things. And I think, Mr. Devana, back to the important data that you need from parents. Again, it's the busing. If you can drive your student to school in the fall, we would encourage you to answer that question in that way when the survey comes out. And the second question on the survey was about, I think there were so many undecideds because people may make a decision whether they will send their students in the fall depending on the model that we choose. And so that makes it a little challenging. But I think to your point, Mr. Devana, there may be some parents who, regardless, will choose to keep their students at home. And so
Right.
that's the important piece that we need to know too, to then help us
Right.
plan for this. So I just want to make sure, because I know there's a lot of parents and others on this Zoom call and maybe watching from home, but the survey matters. And I know we had some glitches with the first one. And the surveys will keep coming. So please, do your best to answer those, as accurately as possible. Dr. Santa.
Just to give you a little bit of more information, is I've had group of parents who are vehemently against their kids coming into school if there's this risk, and on the other side, I have a group of parents that are vehement that their kid come to school because of the intensity of services they need. So I have it on. I'm in really, to be honest, a no-win situation, whichever choice is made. So that's where it's going to become more individualized to that individual student based on the program of services that they require.
Yep. And, I think also Mrs. Duncanson alluded to this a little bit, but, addressing the elephant in the room as well is it is still very uncertain about what our budgetary situation is. And I think we are going to need to call on everyone to help with this. And we see what's going on in the private sector, in higher ed. We see people losing jobs. We see people getting their salaries cut. We see salaries being frozen. We see all of that. And I think we may need to come to the administration, the teachers, the staff, and we may need to consider some other concessions. None of this is what we want to do, but we want to try to avoid laying off anyone. And I learned an interesting fact today that 1 week of our salary is $1.6 million. That's what it costs us weekly in salary. If, for example, we took a furlough for a week, we could gain that money back. So I think we still need to have discussions with the administrators, with the teachers union, and with others. We need to keep working together to figure out what we can do to not only try to reduce layoffs, but also put us in a financial situation that we can do any of these scenarios. Mr. Collins.
I was looking for some clarification, Madam Chairwoman. When you said our salaries, are you referring to the Cumberland Public Schools payroll is
Yes.
1.6 million? It's $1.6 million a week.
Yes. Yes.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
Mr. Prignano.
That's a payroll. That's
Yeah,
a payroll.
there are
Payroll.
26 payrolls, so it's one payroll is 1.6.
So 26, I'm sorry. So there's 26 pay periods. So one pay period, which is actually 2 weeks, not 1 week. My bad on that. You get
Madam
that, Mr.
Chair.
Collins? Is that clear?
I wasn't sure when you said our salary. I wasn't sure if you were talking about your company or like.
No, the district.
No, okay.
Yeah.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
just I need to share a quote. I get like daily online newsletters from my national association, the National Association of School Administrators, and I got this article today. And I'm not going to share this quote to like discourage anybody or to bum anybody out, but I need people to understand what we are up against potentially. So if I may, just 2 sentences. I think we're about to see a school funding crisis unlike anything that we've ever seen in modern history, warns Rebecca Sibilia, the CEO of EdBuild, a school finance advocacy organization. We're looking at devastation that we could not have imagined a year ago. So again, I'm not saying bringing that up to, to discourage anybody, but the reality is, just think about little Rhode Island, $9 billion hole that has to be filled. So, we're unsure about what the future brings, and we just need to be as creative and resourceful as we possibly can. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. If Mrs. Waters and Mr. Collins, if you don't have any other questions related to this agenda topic, we will keep moving ahead.
I do have another question. So I'm sorry, I'm still not clear on the third option. So Tony, you had said we're ready to go if we need to, the way we're operating today. So why is scenario 3 not just what we're doing today?
It can be, but
Okay.
what you all have, again, we can replicate the plan as it is and execute it as it is. If the school committee and the district talk about options in order to plan for the worst, it's a question posed out there that does the school department look at core instruction in the 4 content areas in that scenario to prepare for the worst conditions? It is not what I'm recommending or what our office is recommending. It is putting out what the options are for you to choose when you're weighing the options of risk versus moving forward. If you all choose to move forward in that direction, we're prepared to do whatever. I mean, families deserve to have employment. People deserve to be working, all of that. I get all that. That's not for me to decide. That's why I guess you guys are elected officials. You have to make those difficult decisions, but those are the options that you have in very, very confined and constrained times. And I'll end with this. When Bob presented his first budget, we prepared some graphs for him in terms of ratios, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but a school department on $71 million or $73 million or whatever it is, the vast majority of that is salaries and healthcare. Over 90% of those costs are loaded in those 2 particular things. So I'm not sure, what direction you guys are going to go in. Those are the options, but if you guys choose to do that, we're prepared to go forth with that third option of doing distance learning as it is.
Okay. So if we move ahead to future topics, it sounds like this topic is and will be a future topic for quite some time, for several weeks. So I think we can expect, and Tony, Mr. Durbani, you and I can talk offline about how often we think we should meet about this. I know that there may be a sub-team working together, to think through the scenarios, but in terms of this subcommittee and this official, public forum, at least, every 2 weeks, there will definitely be an update and progress made as new data comes in and new guidelines come in and all of that. So I think this is likely our sole focus for some time. We've talked about, of course, once the budget gets approved by the town council, the impacts of that, but we've got the budget, we have these scenarios.
Karen, we lost your audio.
Once the school year ends, making sure that, we recap that and, lessons learned and all of that stuff. So I know we have some other things, there's potential future topics, but I think we've got the next several meetings laid out are really related to this. Would you agree, Ms. Waters and Mr. Collins?
Oh, I think absolutely. I mean, this.
Did you lose me?
We did before. Can you hear us?
We can hear you now.
Can you hear us?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't know.
we can hear you now. We can hear you now.
Okay, I think these just died. I'll try.
Okay, we lost you briefly, but
Okay,
I think we
all
got
right,
the
I
gist.
didn't say much.
You're clear now,
Okay,
Mrs.
good.
Friedman.
Okay, thank you. I'm now talking into this. Okay, so I think we've got that on the future topics. The next item on the agenda is public comments. And, and so everyone knows if there are any public comments, Mr. Chandler will help us find the people that do, and you can unmute, I think, and let us know if you have a public comment. And if you do, you would state your name and your address and your comment. Public comments are a one-way situation. And, you know, according to the regulations and the laws, it's not something that we can answer questions and have a back and forth. It is simply a way for the public to express their opinions.
So we have, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yep, Mr. Chandler.
So we have a few people that have their hands raised. Looks like Dan Pedro was first, then Heather Bogosian, and then Dana Sochi. Some of them I can unmute. Some of them, if they're on the phone, they can use asterisk or *6 to mute and unmute. So it looks like Dan's ready to go right now.
Okay.
Dan Pedro, 136 Abbott Run Valley Road. First, I'll start by saying that I'm glad that Superintendent Mitchell used the term educationally sound, because throughout this entire meeting, basically all I heard were fiscal decisions, and not once did I hear what was in the best interest of students. I also hope that your specialist teachers aren't joining this meeting today, because I am finding it very difficult to swallow the presentation that talks about itinerants providing enrichment so that parents can work. It more than proves what I've been trying to say all along, that this administration, this town, does not value their teachers that are teaching core curriculum to our students. When you talk about offering enrichment, you're talking about offering above and beyond your core curriculum. I can offer enrichment to my music students if I have extra time. At 7 p.m. tonight, I am offering a Zoom meeting for band students who want to get on and need extra help. That is enrichment outside of my normally contracted hours. To say that we need to keep our itinerants to offer enrichment is basically saying, if we go with model A and B, we're doing a great thing by retaining the staff because we need babysitters. And that is disgusting on all accounts. I really want you to think, look at that presentation and put yourself in the shoes of those highly qualified educators who put their heart and soul into teaching curriculum, okay? Looking at something like that as their future. So I'm just gonna leave it at that, because I'm literally appalled at what happened during this meeting today. If there are specialists attending this meeting today, I apologize on behalf of our administration for the way you were treated. And I look forward to talking to everybody a little bit more about this tomorrow or Thursday. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Santo?
Mr. Pedro, I'm not sure if I understand what you're saying. I absolutely understand what you're saying. However, how would you propose, can you hear me?
We don't, Dr. Santo, we don't respond to public comment.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry.
Never mind.
The law. Thank you.
I thought this was a subcommittee, not a school committee.
I thought public comments are still handled the same.
Yeah, same.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Chandler.
Looks like Ms. Bogosian's next.
Yeah, am I unmuted?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, Heather Bogosian, 320 Abbey Drive, Cumberland, phys ed teacher in town. The letter that I received told me that I was being cut because I was no longer needed. Now, it didn't say anything about a budget issue. I'm not being cut because of a budget. I'm being cut because I'm no longer needed, quote unquote. Mr. Damana just talked about how our long distance learning we're doing a great job within the district. So does that mean that phys ed is not? So we're just going to be cut? And I don't know how you cut a position with a state mandate. I guess it doesn't matter at this point in time. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you.
Looks like Dana Sochi. Sochi?
Sochi.
Sochi.
Yes, Dana Sochi, 45 Greenfield Road, Cumberland. I actually just had a comment about the survey that was sent. So I have 2 children, will be 3 children in the fall, attending Cumberland schools. My older 2 children are in 2 different schools. One is in middle school, one's in elementary school. And I went back and looked at the survey. It doesn't say on the survey question which school your child belonged to, because I did get 2 copies of the survey. My responses were different depending on my child, which child I was talking about. My middle school's, my son, I would send on the bus, but my elementary school children, I would not send on the bus. So I answered those questions 1 and 1, but I'm not sure how you could tell the difference between my responses in your data about which one I answered for which. And that was my comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Looks like Heather Trencio.
Trentiso, it's a tough one.
All right. Thank you.
It's good though. I just had a couple of questions. Through this presentation, we've been talking about how well Cumberland is doing via distance learning. And just from a parent that is trying to work and teach my 2 kids in kindergarten and 2nd grade, we're hanging in there. But by no means would I say that it's a success. We're getting the work that's assigned done to us with some tears from both sides, my kids and myself, just because I don't feel, and I know, this is one thing that I want to make perfectly clear. I know that none of us expected this, and we weren't prepared as a school district to be all doing this, as well as us parents were not prepared to be teaching our kids from home while trying to do our full-time jobs. But by no means is it going well, in that the platforms that we're using are not conducive to a kindergarten and a 2nd grader. And that's all I can speak to, because that's all that I know. I know the middle school and high schoolers have different abilities with this platform, with this Google Classroom. But for me, for my kindergarten child to try to edit a PDF to send their math homework back, that is not conducive to as an environment or a way to teach a child. Secondly, there isn't any teaching going on as much as work being assigned to us. So I think that, whatever we or you as a committee decide to do next year, I know you will have the best interest of all of the students and all of the teachers and keeping everybody healthy. But I really, really hope that we're looking at different avenues in the way to deliver these teachings to our kids, because what we're doing now, again, we're getting through it because there's only a few weeks left, but it's not sustainable for an entire year of learning. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you so much. And I hope that the teachers also are going to get some more training on it. They've been wonderful. Again, they were thrown into this with very little training. So I hope that it's something that we're thinking about, as we know inevitably there will be some sort of virtual learning in the fall, that the teachers are getting trained and we're using better platforms to execute this teaching to our students. Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
can I ask who was speaking? I didn't catch the name of who was speaking.
Yep, my name is Heather Trentiso. I live at 10 Stagecoach Road.
Thank you.
And, I didn't put that. Thank you. Okay. Anyone else, Mr. Chandler?
I don't see anybody at this point, but if anybody does want to unmute themselves, if you haven't raised your hand, *6, you can unmute and ask a question.
Dana Sosi, 45 Greenfield Road again. I kind of wanted to second what the last speaker said, Heather. I have an elementary school student. I have a second grader as well, with my middle school son. My middle school son was fantastic for distance learning. I barely interact with him during school. My second grader was a lot of hands-on, some tears. I agree, it was a lot rougher for the younger kids for distance learning than for the older kids. Thank you.
Oh, okay. We good, Mr. Chandler?
Oh, I have another one just popped up. Allison Ambrose.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, Allison Ambrose, 54 Parkview Trail in Cumberland. I have 2 elementary school students at Ashton, a second grader and a first grader who has an IEP. I actually just wanted to not discount what the last 2 people said, but go against that. I think that Ashton in particular, but all of my children's teachers have done a phenomenal job. I think they are teaching. I think they are doing Zoom calls. I think especially, I know the area that's looking to get hit is the PE and the arts and the music. Those are the lessons that my kids look forward to, and they are engaging and they have just been awesome. So and not all of parents in Cumberland feel that way about the current distance learning model. I am fortunate that I am a teacher as well. So yes, I can help my own children with a lot. But I think that's, this is a unique situation, and that's where we have to step in as parents. My husband and I are both teaching full time, and we're working on this as well with our own children. But I think the teachers at Ashton have been phenomenal. Same with the nursing staff, the principal, everyone has just been amazing in terms of what they are working with, the platforms they are working with, and how well my students, my own children have been engaged. I think that this district has been a model with that. And I just wanted to applaud them and make sure that the teachers that are listening know that as parents, we really appreciate all of their work and hard and effort that they put in.
Have a Laura Brady.
Hey, this is actually Andrew Bartley, her husband. We're just sharing a computer.
All right.
Yeah, thank you. Live at 702 Nate Whipple Highway, Cumberland. Yeah, we only moved here about a year ago. And one of the main reasons we moved here was the excellent school system, or so we thought. And trust me, I get it. I know this pandemic is super weird, once in a lifetime, but I don't know, it makes me second guess that decision a little bit when I hear we're cutting basically the reason why we came here. I don't know, I've been advocating the town for some of my other young professional friends who have jobs out in Providence and Smithfield, and we're looking for a quality school system where we didn't have to, fight over resources or go to a private school. But just hearing this makes me wonder if I did the right thing. I don't know if I have a specific policy proposal, but I don't know. I'm just really worried as someone who made a major life decision, and maybe it might have been the wrong one. Just something to think about. We might have to vote accordingly. And I know that's probably alarmist and I can't see, but it might be an eye rolling thing, but just something to bear in mind as average citizen who just moved here.
I don't see anybody at this point.
Okay. So I encourage everyone to, keep looking at the events calendar on the district website for future meetings. Typically, this meeting is held on Tuesday nights at 5:30. So I'm expecting we will have another meeting next week or the week after, but keep your eyes open for that, and encourage you, of course, the more informed we all are, the more data we get, the more input we get, the better decisions we can make overall. So with that, I need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Yeah, Karen, were we going to talk about additional future, did we already talk about additional future topics?
We did,
Yeah.
we did.
Oh, we talked about continuing this as a future topic, but
Yeah, well, we talked about this, we talked about the budget, we talked about the wrap up to distance learning for, you know, this current school year, and getting a recap on that. And we said that those three things would be that would be keeping us busy for the next several weeks. Is there something else you wanted to add, Mrs. Waters?
well, I mean, as a future topic, and I know we're in the middle of a pandemic and there are other priorities, but we should have on the agenda at some point in the future to talk about strategic plan, since the strategic plan we have on file is 2017 to 2020.
Yes, okay, thank you. I added that.
Thanks.
Okay, and so we have a motion on the table to adjourn by Mr. Collins.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And the meeting is adjourned at 6:56. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Good night.
you.
Thank you.
Yep.